Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bond, Schoeneck and King, a multi-practice law firm in Rochester with offices across New York State serving business, healthcare, and educational institutions. Online at bsk.com. And the Highlands at Pittsford, an independent and assisted living community affiliated with the University of Rochester, offering cottage and apartment homes, daily life enrichment activities, and care assistance as needed. More at highlandsatpittsford.org.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made last week when President Donald Trump said that babies in the United States are now receiving 80 vaccines in doses strong enough for horses. What he was saying was wrong, and according to many experts in the field, dangerously wrong. His comments came just days after HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. testified before the U.S. Senate and made a series of inaccurate comments about vaccines, COVID, hydroxychloroquine, and more. And this kind of misinformation is having an effect. The overall rate of U.S. vaccination is declining. NBC News recently published an investigation that sought to examine vaccination rates in every American county. Here's what they found. Since 2019, 77% of American counties and jurisdictions have reported notable declines in childhood vaccination rates. For some counties, like Monroe County, it's a decline of just a few percentage points, but for others, like Yates County, it's a 20-point drop. For some American counties, it's down 30 or 40 points. Vaccine exemptions for school children are rising nationwide. As many as 53% of counties and jurisdictions saw exemption rates more than double from the first year collecting data to the most recent. And among the states collecting data for MMR, measles, mumps, rubella vaccines, 67% of counties and jurisdictions now have immunization rates below 95%. That's the level of herd immunity that experts say is needed to protect against an outbreak. And we know there have been outbreaks. So what should we know about this? This hour is meant to be informational. This is not a political conversation. It was never meant to be a political conversation. What we want to do is bring in the experts to talk about where we are and answer any questions you have in good faith. I promise you, as the host of this program, if you've got questions, you will not be belittled. You can ask anything you want. We can talk vaccines, we can talk schedule, and we can talk sort of the decline in vaccination rates, herd immunity. There's all kinds of things we can talk about. Doors open to you if you want to call the program, 844-295-TALK, 844-295-8255, 263-WXXI if you call from Rochester, 263-9994. Email the program, connections@WXXI.org. If you're watching on the WXXI News YouTube channel, hello, you can join the chat there. And let me welcome our guests in studio. Dr. Jeffrey Weinberg is a professor of pediatrics and a pediatric infectious disease specialist with UR Medicine. Welcome back to the program, Doctor. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me again.
Welcome back to Dr. Ann Falsey, a professor of medicine at the University of Rochester, an infectious disease specialist with UR Medicine. Welcome back to you.
Very nice to be here.
And Dr. Stephen Schultz is with us, a pediatrician with Rochester Regional Health. Dr. Schultz, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
So again, not a political conversation, but the reason that I do want to listen to a little bit of sound from the last few weeks is because the kind of sound that you're going to hear is having an effect. NBC News' investigation certainly found that with a lot of data, but we've known that anecdotally for much of the last decade. I want to listen to what President Trump said about vaccines last week.
And, children get these massive vaccines like you'd give to a horse. Like you'd give to a horse. And I've said for a long time, this is no secret, spread them out over 5 years. Get 5 shots, small ones. Did you ever see what they give? They give, for a little baby to be injected with that much fluid, even beyond the actual ingredients. They have sometimes 80 different vaccines. It's crazy. It's that's a common sense thing too. It's like you're shooting up a horse. You have a little body, a little baby, and you're pumping this big thing. It's a horrible thing.
It's a horrible thing is how he ends it with. Dr. Weinberg, make sure that mic is nice and close to you so we can hear. Again, it's not a political reaction. It's your professional reaction. What do you make of of that statement there?
I'm actually flabbergasted by his references. I don't know where he gets the count of 80. I don't know where we're getting the comparisons with horse vaccines, and I don't know where he's saying that he's been saying this for years, because this is the first time I've heard something.
I mean, I've heard
like
him
that.
cast doubt on vaccines. He is certainly susceptible to people who bend his ear, like RFK, but I have never heard him say babies get 80 vaccine doses, and that the doses are strong enough for a horse.
And neither is true. I mean, I'm not a veterinarian, but the doses are, I don't believe they're higher than the horse dose. We have, testing way before a vaccine hits the market. They're rigorously tested in clinical trials, both here and around the world. They're vetted by the FDA, which up until this political climate was a believable organization. And then they're re-examined by the CDC, which, again, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices looks at the data again and decides which of the FDA-licensed products, exactly how they should be used. So traditionally, FDA looks at safety and efficacy, that is, how effective a vaccine is, and CDC decides, are they really worth it for the population? And even before that, the companies have looked at whether they're worth it or not. None of the drug companies, as far as I have ever seen, want to sell ineffective products.
We see the data indicating that a large majority of American counties now have lower rates of vaccination than 10 years ago. Do you think statements like the president's are contributing to that, Dr. Weinberg?
Yes, I believe so. I think people are searching for guidance, and when guidance and all people in positions of authority are listened to, sort of automatically. It's a nice part of citizenship that we always thought that when we heard a president or a senator or a congressperson saying something, that they knew what they were talking about. And I think in today's age, we'd have to, no matter which part of the political spectrum on, there's question about whether people in charge know what they're talking about. I think simultaneously the rise, and this may be difficult for me to expound on, but and I don't want to sound like an old curmudgeon, but I think the rise of social media has allowed everybody to have a voice. And everybody having a voice is absolutely precious in a free society. But that voice has to have some accuracy behind it. And the rise of social media has contributed to everybody seeming like an expert and then getting amplified 10,000 times. And I think that's been a little bit of it. I think a third factor, if I can just say one more thing, is that this is something that the scientific community has, not that we've predicted, but that we've known from the behavior in other countries. And that is, if you go back several generations, our grandparents knew how dangerous polio was. They lived in fear of polio every summer, for example, when FDR was growing up. They knew how dangerous measles was. Everybody knew people who had lost children to measles. They knew how dangerous epidemics were. And the very success of our vaccine campaigns and our immunization to try and dampen down those diseases and prevent those diseases has led to the new generation of parents not understanding how serious and how possible these diseases are.
Because they haven't been close to it.
Because they haven't been close to it. And then, so if there's this concept of the life cycle of a vaccine, that the disease is out there, a vaccine is created, it's well taken up, the disease goes away, and then a new generation comes up, doesn't know the disease, worries about possible side effects of the vaccine, stops vaccinating, epidemics come back, and then only then everybody will come to their senses and re-immunize again. And I'm afraid that was an old theoretical concept, and I'm afraid we're recreating that in life right now.
With the cost of children, of lives.
Yes, at the cost of people who are going to get the disease, which is the children. And the other part of that statement of the president's, which was inaccurate, is delaying vaccinations for 5 years or more, slowing down the recommended schedule, is the wrong thing you want to do, because many of these diseases are the most serious and the most life-threatening in early childhood. That's why we give vaccines in early childhood. If we waited till everybody was 10 years old, then many of the people who are going to die would already be dead, the children.
So let me turn to Dr. Falsey. I'll also say what the president said, Dr. Falsey. I'm trying to understand, Dr. Falsey, what the president's idea is here. And maybe he's saying, well, it's not a vaccine for a horse, but it's a huge dose, and it looks like the amount, if he said the amount of fluid that you would give to a horse. I don't know. I know he's not a doctor, but from your perspective, what goes through your mind?
What goes through my mind is to question why anybody would say such things that are wildly inaccurate. And, we'll never know what he intends, what his motivation is, but the end result is it creates fear and uncertainty in parents. And I think everybody can agree that the parents all want to do the best for their child. They want to have a healthy, happy child with a long life ahead of them. But now they get so many conflicting, whether it's social media, as Dr. Weinberg raised, or on the TV or whatever, they don't actually know what to trust anymore. And the traditional sources, the CDC, the FDA, NIH, the scientists, and even their own doctors seem not to be able to reassure them.
I think it's very safe territory to be critical of anti-social media. If both of you want to keep doing that, that's just fine. I'm happy to be a curmudgeon about anti-social media, and I do think that it doesn't create a desire in me to ban speech. And I don't think Dr. Weinberg, when he said people have to be accurate, he's not saying that we should be banning speech. He's saying that there is a cost to amplifying voices that demand to be taken seriously, even if they don't possess expertise.
And we shouldn't all be, and I don't expect everybody to be an expert. My problem is when I go to get my car repaired, I want somebody who's repaired cars before. And
How about getting on an
engine.
airplane? How about getting on an airplane?
Yeah, I want a pilot who's flown a plane before.
But that's elitist. Okay, now I'm getting snarky, and it's not good to get snarky.
Okay.
This is not helpful.
I mean,
I'm going down a bad road.
That's why I say talk to your doctors, because doctors, talk to your pediatricians, talk to your family practitioners.
Well, and unfortunately, some of our traditional sources, when people would ask me questions and they say, well, I've done my own research, and I said, well, you can't always trust what you read on the internet because you can't tell the sources, but you should go to reliable websites such as the CDC. And there's been a lot of casting of doubts on the competence and the motivations of our traditional agencies, which we relied on to make the best recommendations. We don't have the time and energy to look up every study, and that's their job. That's what they do. They do it for us.
Dr. Schultz, you want to weigh in too here? So what are your initial thoughts on when you hear the kind of comments that we played?
Well, it is concerning that these sorts of comments instill doubt and fear into our patients. And, it seems in an unnecessary way that that's happening and without a clear reason. Immunizations are incredibly effective and they're incredibly safe. And, I can't get that across anymore. It's tough, as Dr. Weinberg mentioned, that a lot of these things we don't necessarily see anymore. And so, I've been in practice for over 15 years now. And, when I was training, and Dr. Weinberg was actually one of my mentors, because of these vaccines, we didn't have to do the same kind of lumbar puncture workups that we had to do on so many infants for those that trained maybe just 10 years before me. And so they've been incredibly effective. They've been incredibly safe. And, my hope is that, as has been mentioned, is that folks will listen to their primary care providers and have those conversations with them.
Yeah, and can you just offer one more note on the schedule here? I have an email from Andrew asking, I think he says, I think the president's comments should be condemned. However, when he talks about spreading out the schedule, I think that doesn't sound all that unreasonable. not nearly as unreasonable as what he said about horse vaccines. So, okay, so Dr. Schultz, do you want to elaborate? Dr. Weinberg was making the point that there is a reason for the schedule, but for people who hear the president's remarks about spread it out over 5 years, what would you want them to know, Dr. Schultz?
So these vaccines were studied in the schedule that they have. So when we look at the studies, the research that were done, they were given at 2 months, at 4 months, at 6 months, and antibody levels were measured, and all these different things that go into research were monitored and assessed based on the schedule. And that's how we know that they work, because that's how we did the research, and that's how they've been rolled out. Just like Dr. Weinberg mentioned, there are certainly risks for younger children, infants, to have more serious complications from nearly all of the diseases that we immunize against, which is why immunizing according to the schedule is important. And there's always a risk if you choose to delay immunizations, if you choose to alter that schedule, that you are exposing your child unnecessarily to those immunizations without any reason for doing so.
To those diseases.
Yeah.
For those diseases, yeah.
So let me work in a few other comments here. First of all, here's an email from Ellie who says, today's show is a great reason to plug the memoir, Small Steps, The Year I Got Polio, by Peg Carrot or Curray. I don't know the author. But Ellie says the book is written by a childhood polio survivor aimed at older elementary and middle grade students and details the author's experience of going through the painful treatment process when she contracted polio at age 12. The book serves as an excellent teaching tool for young people to understand what the virus did to people at the time before the polio vaccine was invented. Thankfully, there are multiple copies of this book in the Monroe County Library system, and I encourage everyone to check it out. That's from Ellie. The book's called Small Steps, The Year I Got Polio, if you want to check that out. And similar email from Charlie. He says, Evan, I'm old enough to remember the polio scare of the 1950s and 60s, and my mom telling me about my cousin who got polio and had to wear braces on his legs. Dr. Salk and his colleagues worked tirelessly and selflessly to rid the world of this scourge. It's unconscionable to think someone without a medical degree is spouting off medical advice. I will leave it at that since we don't want to get too political. That is from Charlie. So, yeah, I think polio is one. But there are people living today who, understood what that was like. But I think the more you get down the timeline and the further you get away from it, it's the story of any threat, any existential threat that recedes further in the rear view. It's easy to convince yourself that it was never a threat to begin with, or it couldn't ever be a threat again here. But maybe similar to that point, let's talk about what we have seen this year. We mentioned measles. So Dallas says, I used to hear a lot about the measles outbreak down south. I think he's mentioning Texas. He says, now I don't. How was that resolved? I heard Canada and Europe were having larger outbreaks. Now I don't. So Dallas is sort of implying that was a lot of hype, but the measles thing wasn't that big of a deal. Dr. Weinberg, you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you for that question. Part of the reason you don't hear about it is our attention in public media is fairly short sometimes, and we have other things that are worrying us, wars around the world, etc. Actually, the Canadian measles outbreak is still going on. The Texas measles outbreak has stopped for now because of vaccination of people around the area to prevent further spread. Eventually, epidemics do recede if there are not enough people who are non-immune to that disease to get the disease. So what do I mean by that? So with measles, if there's 100 kids who are susceptible to measles and they're exposed, 95 or more of them are going to get measles. If you get enough kids in that circle who are now immunized, the virus has nowhere else to go, and it will recede. So the Texas epidemic has indeed receded, but there's still activity in New York. In most states, actually, there's been more measles cases this year than has been since, I believe it's 2000.
Okay, Dr. Falsey?
And one thing I'll also bring up is that a lot of these diseases, in particular measles, is prevalent throughout the world. And now that the U.S. is not actively helping other countries with their vaccination programs, we may have more imported cases of measles, polio. They don't respect borders, the viruses.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good context there.
The importation of polio into New York City was from travelers a few years ago. And it's not to blame travelers or to blame immigrants or migrants. It's just as exactly as Dr. Falsey said, viruses don't know anything about borders.
And so we could insulate ourselves better with higher vaccination rates, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Matt writes to say, Evan, I guess I vastly underestimate the social influence that Trump and RFK have. I do believe he is not the sole influence in this movement. We see it very heavily in hip-hop culture with rappers like Nicki Minaj or others being very anti-vax. We see it with influencers who push anti-vaccine as a method to make money from that population. So it's coming from all influential angles. I think the movement is too large to be stopped at this point. That's what Matt says. So first of all, Matt, you're making a very good and important point. And there's different reasons for the stance from different people. Donald Trump might not have the same motivations as someone in the hip-hop community or someone in the influencer online community. But certainly those pressures are real. The idea that it's too big to be stopped, though, flies in the face of the fact that we still have, we're not at a 30% immunization in the country. Even though we see 77% of American counties declining with pediatric vaccination rates, according to NBC News' investigation, Dr. Falsey, we're still, in a situation where most people get their kids vaccinated. Most people get themselves vaccinated. I don't think it's too big to stop it. I think the movement against it, I don't think it's too big. It's not a tidal wave. I don't think. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right. I think most of the country, in particular Rochester, is generally very favorable to vaccination. But I think your caller brings up an important point about these different groups, and you mentioned as well. When I speak to people individually who are vaccine hesitant, there's a lot of different reasons why people don't want to get a vaccine. You can't. The anti-vax movement has many components and many motivations, and particularly during COVID, we had to reach out to community partners because some of the minority populations, they have a reason perhaps not to trust the government, vaccinations, and medical research. And so you have to understand what it is the person is fearful about. Start with the conversation of, why are you fearful? And I don't think, as long as we continue to correct misinformation and try to explain risk-benefit, I don't think it's going to just overwhelm us.
Well, let me get another question from a listener who is asking to submit this question anonymously. This listener says, thank you for having this conversation. I trust vaccines and follow all recommended immunization advice for my children. What I'm wondering about is the flu and COVID vaccines, which our pediatrician has conveyed as optional and seemed almost careful not to nudge one way or the other. In previous years, when we have opted to vaccinate our kids, they contracted both flu and COVID. And I do realize this is not uncommon. It does not change the efficacy and the importance of immunizing children. As a parent, I'm curious, what is the current expert advice on these two vaccines for kids without any risk factors? Given the possible shortage and the issues of availability for people with enhanced needs, is it safe to sit this year out for our kids getting vaccinated against flu and COVID? Dr. Schultz, do you want to start there?
Yeah, so we know that the different vaccines, certain ones have better effectiveness than others. And for instance, we were just discussing the measles. If you have 2 doses of the measles vaccine, you are 97% protected from getting measles, which is great. Flu and COVID, we know, aren't quite that good. The efficacy is lower, but that doesn't mean that it's still not important. We know that they still significantly reduce hospitalization, deaths, and in particular, if you, I found that my family's, the kiddos who get the flu and COVID vaccine, when they get that illness, it doesn't tend to be as severe as if they had not had the vaccine previous. We have actually seen an increase in pediatric deaths from influenza over the past 3 or 4 years here. And in particular, there's something called influenza-associated encephalopathy that has popped up This isn't super common, but of the 13 folks that have gotten it in New York State, 9 have been unimmunized, actually 10, and 1 was ineligible to get the vaccine. So there is certainly still, importance in getting the flu and the COVID vaccines and protecting against more serious outcomes and as well against things like long COVID, as in that case. We also know that certain populations are more susceptible to these illnesses. So, for instance, COVID, less than 6 months of age, if you get COVID, your chances of being hospitalized are similar to the 65 plus population. In the 6 month to 23 month age category, your risk of getting hospitalized from COVID is similar to the 55 to 64-year-old population. So, while most people, it's a it's more of a mild course, we know that there are some populations that are more susceptible and why these vaccines are all the more important.
Okay, Dr. Weinberg, for this listener who wants to know, safe to sit out this year for our kids with flu and COVID vaccines?
I think, Ed, that's always a difficult question. I mean, my answer is going to be no. But again, it's the vaccines are much safer than the disease. So I'll say that first. All the vaccines on the market are far safer than if you take your chances with the illness. A listener could point out, yes, but that you said if. So who gets ill and who doesn't get ill is not in our purview. But if you do get ill, as Dr. Schultz said, if you're a child, you're much more likely to be hospitalized or get sicker. So I would say if you're trying to provide the maximum safety to your child, I would always, every year I would give them influenza vaccine and now COVID vaccine, and especially in those under 23 months of age, especially in those with any of the risk factors. But I think it's safe and beneficial to all children under 18 years of age. So I thank the caller for asking that, and I'm sorry that their pediatrician has been so, or family practitioner, whoever it was, has been so even-handed in discussing its options. That's what the CDC is trying to tell us now, that it's optional. If you go to the American Academy of Pediatrics website, where the American Academy of Pediatrics has always had an immunization schedule, you'll notice that they have stuck with the previous suggestions, the suggestions that I just had, which are that these 2 vaccines are more often than not effective and are always safe and beneficial to children and should continue to be given.
One more question from a listener before the break that I'll ask Dr. Falsey to weigh in on. This comes from a viewer on YouTube who says, I'm a nurse. I always got my flu shot. I updated tetanus before a long remote camping trip. I declined the COVID vaccine when it was an option, and then I lost my job when it was required. And now here we are, and people don't even know where their little proof cards are. So the implication being, the here we are line, I read that as, you reap what you sow. People don't trust the establishment anymore. And remember those proof cards, people don't even know where those are. I mean, I'm curious to know, Dr. Falsey, if you feel like there's been a need for reflection in your profession about lost trust or where you sort of put, whose doorstep you put that at.
Well, I think it's an excellent point to raise. And I think looking backwards is always easier than dealing with a crisis at the time. And where we are, I would say, is we now know that the RNA vaccines do not provide 100% protection against infection, and that they're not durable because immunity wanes and there's different variants. They are extremely good, however, for keeping you out of the hospital and having severe disease, even if you haven't gotten a booster, that they were tremendously effective. And where we were when and this is a country of individualists, they don't like to be told what to do, but I think people have forgotten it was flatten the curve. I mean, the hospitals were bursting at the seams. We were seriously worried we would run out of ventilators. And if you had a stroke or heart attack, you couldn't get in the hospital. So the idea of mandating people getting vaccinated at that moment in time, they were 95% effective early on to prevent that severe disease that ended you up in the hospital. What do we do now? I think I'm not, even though I'm a very big proponent of vaccines, I can see a young, healthy person in their 20s saying, I always get a bad reaction to the RNA vaccine. I have zero risk factors. The hospitals are now functioning well. That the decision to say, I don't want to get a COVID vaccine this year is not unreasonable. When we talk about the kids, the mortality and the hospitalization rates, it's a U-shaped curve. So those little kiddos, less than 2, and the older people, 65 and over. But, in the middle there, if you're young and healthy, I could live with someone's personal decision. But, back at the time that there were mandates, there were reasons that was done.
Yeah, I understand the point. And, maybe tied to the question on public trust, Mark emails to say, Evan, whatever happened to the died suddenly movement? I admit I'm not up to speed lately. I will say for listeners who don't know what that is, there was this meme, I guess I'll call it a meme, or this idea going around after the COVID vaccines came out, that anybody who died suddenly, it had to be because of the vaccine. They tried to put the vaccine as the blame for Damar Hamlin, the Buffalo Bills player who nearly died on the field in Cincinnati. Of course, it ended up having nothing to do with the vaccine, and Hamlin, of course, is still playing. But it was cases like that in which there was cardiac arrest or something, an accident, and people were saying, well, that person shouldn't have died. And there was this effort to say the COVID vaccines are going to create a wave of young deaths that never would have occurred. And the data just doesn't support it. I want to say, I don't say that lightly. I don't say that like if you are actually wondering, it's easy to wonder. We all have questions. The lay public, if we're not experts, it's okay to wonder. But the data is very clear on that. In fact, a lot fewer people are dead thanks to the COVID vaccines, not more. And there's not a wave of young people age 18 or 28 or 38 who all of a sudden dropped dead and no one knew why. It just didn't happen that way. So, Mark, I don't know if that's still a thing that people are looking at or worried about, but there's just not data on that. After we take our only break, I've got more phone calls lined up. I've got emails. We're going to get through as much as we can. And we're really glad to have the expertise of doctors Jeffrey Weinberg and Ann Falsey and Stephen Schultz with us, talking about vaccines and what we all ought to know coming up.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. MaryCariola.org.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Let me continue to work through the questions, comments, etc. And this is Pat in Geneva listening on Finger Lakes Public Radio. Hey, Pat, go ahead. Hi, Pat.
82 years.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Hi.
Pat. Yeah, go ahead.
82 years ago, my mother was in an iron lung. She was in her 28 years old, died of polio, leaving 2 little children.
Oh, Pat.
My cousins don't realize, they're in their 70s, they don't realize what polio had done at that time and how grateful we all should be that there are vaccines. So it's not just the little ones that something can happen to. If it's a mother leaving little children, that's not good either.
I'm sorry for your loss, Pat. And even the phrase iron lung for a lot of young adults is not something that they even really understand. Dr. Falsey, you had sort of a visceral reaction to that story. What would you want listeners to understand there?
Yeah, it reiterates what we've been saying, that the vaccines have been so successful. People don't understand these were really terrible, terrible diseases. I am old enough that at family picnics, we would always have somebody with leg braces or, that had polio. So it was real to us. And, our mothers were like, no, you can't go swimming in August because that's when polio is around. So it was a real thing. And, I do understand how if you've never seen it or experienced it, that it's just so remote, you don't have the same, as you say, visceral reaction to it.
Part of the problem is biological in that these pathogens or germs are still out there for the most part. So there's some diseases we can eradicate, like smallpox we have taken out of the world by use of vaccines. But some germs are just going to be there. Like tetanus, it's in the soil. You can't get rid of tetanus ever. So we need to continue to be immunized against tetanus, even though none of us have really seen a case of tetanus recently. It's out there. So I like to think of vaccines as sort of training our immunity or updating our, rebooting our personal immune computer, if you will, or being the next textbook or something like that. It's because these disasters are awaiting. Well, I don't like to say disaster, but infections are awaiting. And again, they neither care about international borders, nor do they care about who they're going to attack next.
Let me direct the next question to, let's see here. Boy, there's a bunch. Let's just keep going. I'll get as many phone calls, and then if you've posted a question on YouTube or email, we'll try to get them all in here. This is Pat next in Rochester. Hey, Pat, go ahead.
Yes, I get my flu and COVID vaccines, and my children got their vaccines. But I think we should give credit to those skeptics who got mercury out of vaccines. If you think about it, we were giving mercury to tiny babies. And I'm hopeful that we will eventually get all the aluminum out of our vaccines also. But I think that we also need to focus that exposure to the PFAS chemicals present in all of us are known to reduce the reaction that we should experience to vaccines.
Yeah, let me just jump in, Pat. Let me start by saying this before I turn it over to the experts. When we in the lay public hear words like mercury, even something like the word arsenic, which I'm not saying, I don't even know. I'm saying like there are trace amounts, there's non-zero amounts, there's thresholds of concern that I don't understand about literally anything. And it's easy for me to see what are the ingredients in this vaccine and then go, well, I don't want mercury. I don't want mercury. When I have no idea how much is in there, how does it act with the other items that are in that vaccine? What is its purpose? Is it at a level or threshold of harm? So I hear your concern, and I just want to salute the fact that you're trying to be up on top of stuff. That's really important. I don't necessarily share the idea that I, as a layperson, could look at a list in a vaccine and say, well, there's mercury in it, so it's bad. There's aluminum, so it's bad. Dr. Falsey, is it a goal to get mercury or aluminum or anything else out of vaccines? How would you respond to that call from Pat in Rochester?
So I think it's always important to look at the components of a vaccine and determine if its use is warranted. Mercury, thimerosal, used to be in multi-dose vaccines because it is a preservative. So it kept bacteria from growing. Almost all vaccines are now mercury-free, although they never showed that it actually led to any harmful effects. And it's and I'm not a chemist. It's a different type of mercury than some of the other ones. I can't speak eloquently.
Ethyl mercury.
Yeah,
Okay.
ethyl. So the only thing left that has any mercury is multi-dose flu vaccine. And the ACIP just voted to not go forward with that. And unfortunately, as you were pointing out, there's levels to which it's almost negligible. But what it means is you can't have vaccine clinics in potentially low-income settings or in nursing homes, or it's going to drive the cost up. And so would I like every component out of it if it's not necessary? Well, in a multi-dose vial, it's providing protection against bacteria growing. Most things are now single use. Regarding aluminum, it's called alum in the vaccine world. It is what we refer to as an adjuvant, something that boosts your immunity more than just the vaccine itself. And every vaccine that is in use, it's studied sort of with and without adjuvants. There's new adjuvants coming along. So, I don't have a safety concern with these things, but they're continually updated and studied.
Let me ask Dr. Schultz and Dr. Worm. Dr. Schultz, do people say to you, any aluminum in this, and is that safe for my kids?
I don't get that a lot, but I have the occasional parent that does ask about ingredients. And, one of the things I would also add to what Dr. Falsey mentioned is that many of the vaccines that we have now come together with multiple different things that you're protecting against in one shot. And, that's one of the wonderful advents of medical technology and science is that now instead of giving numerous separate injections, we can do one injection that covers multiple things at once. For instance, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, polio, Haemophilus influenza B, which is a terrible bacteria, polio, hepatitis B. There's one single shot that is a single dose that covers all of those things and reduces the number of immunizations and also any potential adjuncts by doing that combination vaccine.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'll just add to what Dr. Falsey and Dr. Schultz have said. There's the first comment is the caller's absolutely right. We all want to get the safest vaccines we can. We believe we have them right now. It's none of us really missed taking out ethyl mercury from the vaccines, the thimerosal, although, as Dr. Falsey pointed out, it was there for a reason. Now we have to use single shots, lots of more medical waste, single doses. But if that's what people want, that's fine. And ethyl mercury is totally different than inorganic mercury. It's totally different than methyl mercury. So much of the information that was out there about mercury's toxicity was inappropriately taken because it was a different chemical form. I don't want to get into biochemistry here, but I could go on forever about that. But the second, but yes, we all are exposed to mercury, to arsenic, to aluminum from the pots we cook in, from the water we drink, from living on Earth, which the Earth's crust is mostly metal and the inner core of the Earth. So we're all exposed to these things. And the question always has to be asked, how much exposure is bad and or worse? And so the studies that have been done in children who are vaccinated or not vaccinated don't show any difference in their metal contents if you measure it in their blood, their hair, their skin, than in children who haven't been vaccinated. The other thing that people do ask me about sometimes, and that might relate to President Trump's misconception of the multiple components of vaccines, is actually today's vaccines are safer than those that we got or that our grandparents got or parents got. Because we have, for many of the vaccines, they're much more clean and chemically purified than the old vaccine. And the biggest example of this is the whooping cough or pertussis vaccine. The whole cell pertussis vaccine was a soup of pertussis germs that were inactivated and given, and they were very effective at preventing pertussis or whooping cough. But they gave, older parents will remember, they gave a lot of reactions, a lot of fever, a lot of sore legs, a lot of crying. And the newer pertussis vaccines are much more purified. And so we're giving, if you count up what's in the vaccines biochemically, we're actually getting more protection for less components injected into the children, which is the goal, to be as safe as we can, but to get the same protection. So we've actually come a very far way with that, and I don't think it gets publicized as much as it could have.
All right, we're going to try to move faster because I still have a lot I want to work in, including one more clip I want to listen to. From YouTube, a viewer says, last month I decided to get a COVID booster, and my parents and sister told me not to because they claimed lots of young people were dropping dead. This caused a huge family argument. I'm sorry you had to deal with that argument, and I'm sure you love your family, and I'm sure they care very much. They are not correct about that, though. There are not young people dropping dead from COVID vaccines. Good luck to you. Now, speaking of COVID vaccines, Ellie did follow up to say that from New York State, per a New York State executive order, now extended another month, pharmacies can provide vaccines for anyone over 6 months. Many local CVS pharmacies have the pediatric doses. Call and ask. So you should be able to find them, from what I understand here. That sound about right to you, Ann Falsey, doctor?
It does.
Okay.
But I'm going to defer to my pediatric
That's not your
colleagues.
umbrella there. Yeah.
No, I wasn't aware of any shortages per se. What I was aware of is across the country there are questions about whether you need to go to your doctor to get an order or not. And in the state of New York, no, you don't. You can go, just like we did last year, you can go to the pharmacy, answer a few quick questions, and get your flu or COVID vaccines.
All right, real quick, Dr. Weinberg. Beth wants to know, do you recommend COVID and flu vaccines for someone recovering from Lyme disease?
Yes.
There's no evidence that
There
recovering from Lyme disease means that you should avoid those vaccines right now.
That is correct. I always like people to be, in general, good health when they're getting vaccines, but recovering from Lyme disease should be, if they're feeling better, they're not having constant fevers or anything, which they've been treated, that should be fine.
All right, one more clip I want to listen to, and it's a good way to kind of start to close the program because it's from another doctor, but it's a doctor who's a U.S. Senator. The HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. testified before the U.S. Senate, and he had this exchange with a Republican who voted for his confirmation. That Republican is Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana. He's a gastroenterologist who's been critical of RFK regarding vaccines. And I want to listen to this back and forth between Senator Cassidy and Secretary Kennedy.
You also said that you were also, as lead attorney for the Children's Health Defense, you engaged in multiple lawsuits attempting to restrict access to the COVID vaccine. Again, it surprises me that you think so highly of Operation Warp Speed when, as an attorney, you attempted to restrict access. Now, let me ask.
I'm happy to explain why.
I have 3 minutes and 30 seconds left. It also surprises me because you've canceled, or HHS did, but apparently under your direction, $500 million in contracts using the mRNA vaccine platform that was critical to Operation Warp Speed. Again, an accomplishment that I think President Trump should get a Nobel Prize for. You canceled $500 million in contracts. Now, I grew up in a middle-class family, so $500 million seems, this is canceled, it seems like an incredible waste of money. But it also seems like a commentary upon what the president was attempting, what the president did in Operation Warp Speed, which is to create a platform by which to create vaccines. So this just seems inconsistent that you would agree with me the president deserves a tremendous amount of credit for this.
Is this a question, Senator Cassidy, or is this a speech that you don't want me to answer? Because I want to answer that question.
Please,
If it's a question.
But be tight, please.
First of all, the reason that Operation Warp Speed was genius is it did something nobody had ever been done. I don't think any president but President Trump could do it. It got the vaccine to market that was perfectly matched to the virus at that time when it was badly needed, because there was low natural immunity and there were people getting very badly injured by COVID. And then, but it was also brought in therapeutics like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and protocols for treatments. And there were no mandates. And then
okay, I have another question, so please, about 15
That's when
seconds.
I began litigating against President Biden's mandates. Now,
I'm sorry, let me go on because
in terms
you've
of
covered
me
the mandates
canceling those
before.
contracts,
I have limited time, Mr. Secretary, I'm sorry. You've called for, and rightly so, that we should restrict participation in agencies for those with conflict of interest. I would like to submit for the record a evaluation of the conflict of interest of those who are on the ACIP and the Vaccines and Related Biologic Products Advisory Board. It was not 97% as alleged, rather it was 6.9%, and it was 1.2%, I think, for the other panel.
Without objection.
Now, I am concerned, though, because many of those whom you have nominated for the ACIP board,
Senator,
excuse me,
you have the facts wrong in there.
excuse me, can I have my time back?
Yes.
Yeah. What I am concerned about is that many of those whom you've nominated for ACIP have received revenue as serving as expert witnesses for plaintiffs' attorneys suing vaccine makers. Now, one of my colleagues in another setting alleged that you seem more interested in settlements than science. If we put people who are paid witnesses for people suing vaccines, that actually seems like a conflict of interest. Real quickly, do you agree with that?
No, I don't.
I encourage you to listen and watch the whole exchange with Dr. Bill Cassidy, a senator, a Republican senator from Louisiana, deeply critical of HHS Secretary RFK Jr., but it's a good place to wrap because before the program began, I think it's fair to say the doctors in studio were saying that sometimes you feel a sense of mistrust from the public because the work that you do entails, working with products created by Big Pharma. It's a whole other conversation on people's distrust of Big Pharma. And I understand opioids and a lot goes into it. However, Dr. Weinberg, let's close with this in our last 40 seconds or so. Do you see where Dr. Cassidy is going there with the dissonance in the arguments from the HHS secretary? Do you think the senator from Louisiana was on the right trail there?
It's absolutely dissonant. I know many of the people, I'm sure Dr. Falsey knows them too, who are fired from ACIP. And it is true. There was less than a 5% conflict of interest, that they always recused themselves from votes. They were heavily vetted. I've been on ACIP work groups, and I know how heavily the vetting is. And the people that Mr. Kennedy has appointed are almost all, for the most part, conflicted by payment.
They're making money representing plaintiffs.
Money.
They've made money, going after vaccine makers.
Yeah.
Even though Kennedy has said his big concern is conflict of interest.
Yeah. That's what it seems.
Okay. I want to say we covered a lot of ground here, but we're going to continue to have these conversations. And I want to thank Dr. Jeffrey Weinberg and Dr. Ann Falsey and Dr. Stephen Schultz for taking the time to be with us, to share their expertise. Thank you for coming in. I know your time is very, very valuable. We appreciate it. Come back again sometime, maybe on a happier occasion. Thank you, Dr. Schultz. Go ahead, Dr. Schultz.
One last thing I'd like to leave with. I have a 13-year-old son who's been fully vaccinated according to the schedule, including every possible flu and COVID vaccine he's ever been eligible for. So I just like to leave with everybody, all our listeners, that I practice what I preach, and I believe all our local primary care providers do as well.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you, doctors. All right, more coming up.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.